viewers, and welcome yet again to this episode of Dinner Guide. I am your host, Chef Andy, and today we are going to be making something somewhat simple, somewhat difficult. If you haven't seen it before, we're going to be focusing on a beef casserole. Now, before we begin, I'm going to introduce the ingredients before you just to give you an idea of what to expect. Now, from the very front, on the very last end, I've got a teaspoon of cumin powder. I've also got some dried marjoram, about a teaspoon. You're also going to require some chili beef cubes, 1 teaspoon of nutmeg, 2 teaspoons of paprika powder, about 6 to 8 pieces of cherry tomato. You'll also require 1 medium-sized carrot, peeled and washed. You're also going to require some leeks, washed and cleaned as well. About 2 half sticks of celery, cleaned and rinsed. You're also going to require about just a small quantity of some red and yellow capsicum, about 100 grams of beef, 2 peeled potatoes, rinsed, peeled and washed, some salt and pepper to season, some oil to cook with, and last but not least, some beautiful, simple dill to work with. Now we're going to take a very short break now, giving you a bit of time to stretch, unwind and prepare yourself for the show, and we'll catch you after a very short break. Hello viewers, and welcome back to the show. For those of you who missed out on the introduction, we're going to be working on a very simple beef casserole today. And just to start us off, we already have a pan on the heat. Proceed to add about a tablespoon of oil and allow your pan to come to the heat. Next, we'll proceed to chop up some white onion. And for this, you could chop it as even coarsely, doesn't really matter what size, but just try and make sure to have it in the same uniform cut. Proceed to do the same for the other half. Proceed to discard the stems. And begin your cooking process by adding your onions first. Now proceed to grab a spoon and begin to toss your onions in your pot. Add a little bit of oil if it's still too little. And next up, we're going to proceed to chop up our leeks. So I'm just going to begin by just pressing them very firmly onto the board and just proceed to slice as thin as possible. And proceed to do so for the other half. And now, while allowing your onions to sweat off, proceed to continuously mix the onions in your pot. And at this stage, we'll begin to add some of our aromatics, beginning with our cumin powder and our nutmeg. Mix through. Nice beautiful aroma coming through there. Now we're also going to be incorporating some celery to this mixture, but we are going to be slicing that a little thicker in size. This is just to make sure we can actually be able to see the difference once the dish is plated. Remember, it's always good to play with different cuts, especially when working with vegetables. Always brings a nice finish to your dish. And it also just brings a beautiful harmony to your dish in general. Now next up, we're also going to slice our carrot into some about an eighth of an inch in thickness, and we're just going to add them as strips. Proceed to do the same with the second half of your carrot. Of course, making sure that all of your vegetables are cut similarly the same size. Remember, very important to make sure that your size is constant right through. Remember, this will always affect the end result of your dish. Right, now next up, we're also going to be adding our meat. But remember, very important to mention, especially when working with raw meat, very important to get a nice beautiful browning of it before proceeding to cook. So one very simple trick I like to use is, once your aromatics are just beautifully integrated into your mirepoix, proceed to return your pot to the heat, adding a little bit of oil. And now all we're going to do is proceed to cube our beef. So I'm first of all going to grab some kitchen towel. This is just to make sure that our meat is completely dry and there's not any traces of blood. And just proceed to do the same with all 3 of your pieces. And just for record, I am working with beef fillet for this particular recipe. Now you can discard that. Very important to remember to rinse your hands when working with raw ingredients, especially meat or fish or chicken. And now we're just going to proceed to return our pot back to the heat, and very, very simply proceed to just slice our beef into some thick half-inch strips. While continuing to brown your meat, proceed to add your stock cubes. Once your stock cubes are completely dissolved, proceed to add some of your thyme. Proceed to add the rest of your ingredients back to your pot. Okay, once your ingredients are now combined, we will proceed to begin to cube our potato. So we're only going to cut that 4 ways. We're going to add that to our pot. Do the same for the second piece. Proceed to mix through. Proceed to toss your mixture. And finish off by adding your dried marjoram and some paprika powder. And of course, very important to have some water. Proceed to add your liquid right up until you get to the very top surface of your mixture. And proceed to mix everything through together once more, allowing for your paprika and your marjoram to mix through the rest of the ingredients. And now we're basically going to allow that to continue to simmer, allowing our potatoes and our carrots to soften, also allowing the meat to fully cook. We are also going to be taking a very short break, but when we do come back, I will be taking you through the last and final step of finishing this very simple casserole, and we will proceed to plate. And I can also now share some very, very simple handy tips that you may want to take record of. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who are just catching up, we're right at the last and final stage of our casserole. So I'm going to begin by just roughly chopping up some red bell pepper. And I'll do the same thing for the yellow one. And this is just basically to give our dish a bit of color, as well as really improving the flavor and the nutrient content. Proceed to mix that through, and by this stage your potatoes are very, very soft, almost breaking apart. Your meat is nice and tender as well, and the sauce is actually now starting to really thicken nice and properly. And while that continues, I'll proceed to add to that about 5 pieces of cherry tomato. We'll just add those whole. And now proceed to mix through. But for the last and final ingredient, just going to begin by just slicing just a bit of that beautiful top shoots there. And now all you need to do is just Reconstitute those to the center of your bowl or your board, sorry. And using a sharp knife, just proceed to begin to shred that very finely. Making sure, of course, to always try and get an even, consistent chop right through to the end. Right, once you have that beautiful chiffonade from your onion, proceed to add that to your dish. Mix through once more. And your casserole is now just about ready to serve. So we're going to be serving this in this big beautiful plate in front of us. So we're going to be using a ladle to plate, but before I do so, very important to just correct the seasoning by crushing in some black peppercorns and adding a pinch of salt. Mix that through once more, and now you can proceed to turn off your heat completely, and you can very simply begin to plate your dish. Of course, always making sure to try and get as much of the solid content first. Just move that to the center. Proceed to plate that right around the sides, of course making sure to get a nice even separation between your vegetable and your meat. Very important to also take your time plating. It always allows for you to get a nicer, more refreshing appeal to your plate. Now just finish garnishing off with your cherry tomatoes, going with 3 on the side, 1 on the top. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my very simple take on beef casserole. As I mentioned earlier, it is something that most of you may already know how to make. But for those of you who may actually be looking for something refreshing, this is one particular beautiful seller, and I will always say it, kids love this more than I could ever imagine. So I will recommend, if you want to try something refreshing for your kids, probably if you're looking also at giving them maybe a one-pot dish that is a little easier to consume, doesn't need to give you a fuss on making starches or any salads or any particular accompaniments, this would be the very, very best choice for you and your family. So from the studios, I will bid you farewell, thanking you once again for tuning in this far. And until the next episode, God bless. See you soon.